Hello there, Pursuing Freedom friends. Thanks as always for tuning in. And it's your host here, Erin Bradley. So today I've got Chris Miles here with me, and Chris is the host of the Money Ripples podcast. We were introduced not too long ago and connected on a phone call, and instantly I thought you have to be on my show. He's the cash flow expert and calls himself the anti-financial planner. He's been featured in US News, CNN Money, Entrepreneurs on Fire, BiggerPockets, you name it. And his mission is helping more people get fast financial freedom. In just the last 15 years, he's increased his clients' cash flow by over $300 million. So he is not new to the game. He is changing lives, transforming people's financial situations all day, every day. And I thought to myself, pursuing freedom is all about freedom, and freedom often means peace, and peace comes when we have financial independence, right? I also love him because the sign behind him right now as I'm recording says, live your life now, not tomorrow. And so we are very philosophically aligned. And I thought, why not bring the expert himself onto the show so my listeners can meet him and hopefully connect with him and potentially work with him and learn from him. So with no further ado, Chris, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Hey, it's been my honor, Aaron.
Bring us back to the beginning because I know you've got a great story that's led you to where you are now and the mission you have here on the planet to serve your clients. So, share the backstory and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so my backstory is, I realized probably like a lot of you guys as well that if you want control of your time, your destiny, your money, your financial freedom and possibilities and all that kind of stuff, being a business owner is one of the best ways to do it. And so I was trying to look for some business to start. I probably should have found a real estate agent or something like that, but I didn't. I did actually become a mortgage broker for a time though, however. But no, like I was trying to find some business because my whole goal was to become a business consultant. I realized in college, I'm like, I didn't want to be the employee cog. I wanted to be somebody who had that control and that freedom. So I was looking for some business, and the first one that came around that intrigued me a little bit was being a financial advisor. Not realizing they take anybody off the street as long as you can pass a test, with 70% and not be a criminal, right? So I went through that licensing, did that, and I actually really enjoyed being my own boss. And so I actually ended up going down that path. Now I did that partly because what inspired me was hearing not the good, but the bad from my dad, right? My dad, he was always the guy that says, hey, we can't afford this. We think I am made of money. Money doesn't grow on trees, very depression era mentality. On top of that, he always bought everything on sale. It had to be on a case lot. So we would eat Cap and Crunch for a year straight to the point where I almost have scars in my mouth from Cap and Crunch too much, and things, what I'm talking about. If you've sucked on those things, they're
I
like,
do, I do. That's why I'm laughing.
it's like sucking gravel.
All
Um,
right. Yeah.
but so anyways, like my dad was always that cheap, save everything kind of guy. Well, he would always tell me, he's like, Chris, I'm going to die working. The stress of my job will kill me, literally. And he had already had strokes and heart attacks by his 40s and 50s. So I thought, if I learn about money and investing, not only will that be good for me, but maybe that'll be good for my dad as well. Maybe I can give him some of his time back. So I started doing that. And after 4 years, my dad said, well, are you going to advise me at some point? And even though he was kind of like the inspiration, I never told him that, but he kind of was for me. I said, all right, sure. And so I sat down with my dad, saw his money financial situation for the first time in my entire life because he was very guarded with his money. And noticed he was debt free, paid off everything, including his house. He paid off in 17 years. Super proud that he was 100% debt free. Dave Ramsey would have been proud of him too. And then, of course, he had been stuffing money in his 401k, right? So he'd been doing that for years as well. And I looked at everything. This is at the end of 2005. I'm looking at everything. And I said, Dad, here's the deal. You're 61 years old. If you want to retire today, you're going to need to die in about 5 or 6 years because that's when you're going to run out of money. He said, all right, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. So what do? I want to retire at some point. I said, I don't know. You did everything right from what I teach as a financial advisor. And that bothered me so badly that just in the following month, I'm talking with a friend that I hired to be a financial advisor, but then he went to go do some crazy thing called real estate investing, right? And as we're chatting, he finally just says, well, Chris, well, how many of your clients are financially free? Well, what do you mean by financially free? Like they never worry about money. Oh, well, they all worry about money. So none of them, even the retired ones, worry about running out of money too soon. He's like, okay, great. Good job, Chris. Way to help nobody. How about this? How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions, but actually doing these investments, right? It's kind of like asking a real estate agent, hey, how many properties have you bought? It's kind of like that question. And as I started to really think about it, and there was probably about 100 or so financial advisors in my office, Some of them have been working there since the 1970s. And I realized, I said, well, I don't think any of them could retire off their investments. Like, there's your problem. And so I started going down the whole rabbit hole. You might call it the matrix, right? Where I took the red pill, and all of a sudden I'm realizing that there's this whole other world, like with passive income and real estate investing. Some of the same stuff you hear in Rich Dad Poor Dad, but actually I was seeing how it was done. And so I actually eventually quit being a financial advisor in 2006. I vowed never to teach about money again. I said I'll just be a mortgage broker and I will teach ballroom dancing on the side. Because little known fact, I was one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers. But I wanted to understand about real estate investing, how they were doing what they're doing, and even like hard money loans and things like that I'd never heard about before as a financial advisor. And as I started to do those things, like turn my starter home into a rental, and then I, started to realize I could lend my money and do different things. The next thing I know, later that year, when I'm 28, almost 29 years old, I was able to retire. And I thought, holy cow, this is way better than what I thought was possible as a financial advisor, where I was hoping and praying I could be cheap enough to save enough by my 40s. But I had now done it in my late 20s. And that's where I, in 2007, came out of retirement and realized I wanted to teach people how to do what I did. And so that's what I've really been teaching people how to do, is how do you become work optional, where you work because you want to, not because you have to, because you have enough passive income coming in to cover everything you have. And that's where we've helped people even on the cash flow side, even like freeing up cash flow. Like, how do you save money in taxes, and how do you pay off debt more creatively than what you're taught by everybody else? Or how do you, like, again, make more money, even if it's passively with real estate investments and things like that. That's really what I've been doing for many years now.
Awesome. So I've got several questions, as always.
Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost, that story is quite extraordinary, and that it all happened at such a young age. So
Mhm.
you said you started going down the rabbit hole in the matrix and learning. So can you unpack that a little further? What was the approach that you took? You mentioned turning your primary into a rental and things like
Mhm.
this, but was it all real estate? Was it a diversification of asset classes? Tell us a little bit more of the nitty gritty for your story, because then
Yeah.
I want to take it a little bit further than that.
Yeah, it was a combination of two things that I did. So one with the real estate, yes, I turned my starter home into a rental. Funny enough, I actually sold it to an investor at full appraisal, leased it back, and then subleased it to rent it out again. So I was able to sell off and strip out all my equity and then rent it. So I did that. And then I also realized with hard money lending, you could do stuff like that, because now at the time, 2006, I mean, obviously real estate was kind of like real estate in 2021. It was a little bit crazy, and there's real estate investors paying pretty large sums of interest. And so this is what mindset shift happened for me. What I started to do with that is, for example, as a financial advisor, I would teach people that, you would only, you have 100,000 bucks, you should only be able to pull off 3% a year if you want to retire, right? Like, people used to talk about the 4% rule all the time. Like, you could pull off 4% of your retirement forever. They debunked that years ago. Even 20 years ago, we were questioning that rule. Now it's right around 3%. So I thought, okay, if I want to live on $5,000 a month, 60,000 a year, to do that, I got to save $2 million in mutual funds to, then live on $60,000 a year, right? At 3%. But when I realized this, well, if I get paid even say 1% a month by lending my money out to real estate investors, well, now if I want to earn, $5,000 a month, I don't need $2 million. I need a quarter of that. I only need $500,000. And it was like, whoa, like, this just made it easier. Now at that time, there's people paying like 2% plus a month. So it was even easier to do that, right? Because the appreciation was so incredible that people are like, I can pay you whatever you want. We don't even have to rent out the property. We'll make money just by flipping these properties. But still, like, that was the environment we were in back then. So that was one way. It was just, yes, rental, and of course, like things like hard money lending, just lending my money out to other investors, to let them do all the work, and I just get paid as the bank. The second way was actually kind of accidental, and it would apply to your audience. And I'm sure some of you guys have already figured this out, but understand that when I was a financial advisor and I had life and health insurance licenses, I had my securities licenses, and I had my mortgage license too. And so when I quit being a financial advisor, I was like, okay, I'll never teach about money again. I was like, but I can be a mortgage broker. I didn't realize at the time there was a lot of mortgage fraud happening, because I thought, at least as a mortgage broker, I could be honest. Whereas a financial advisor, I didn't feel like I felt like a liar and a deceiver, right? So I was a mortgage broker, but I remember I had a friend that asked me, he said, Chris, do you like doing mortgages? I said, I love helping them, but I just despise paperwork. And I despise the fact that I tell them it might be 3 weeks before we close, and they call me the next day asking when are we going to close, right? Like those kind of things. And so he said, well, if you hate that stuff, why don't you find somebody who likes doing that stuff? I said, well, nobody likes doing paperwork. Who would like doing paperwork? He's like, trust me, Chris, there are people that love it. So I went to the mortgage broker. I said, hey, listen, do you have somebody that fits this description? And the owner said, yeah, Clark, go talk to him. Because if your name's Clark, obviously you got to be a nerd, right? So I went to Clark and I said, hey, Clark, if if I just basically spoon feed you clients, like people that are already ready, like I'm teaching them strategies like how they could strip out equity, invest it in real estate and stuff. And I was getting friends and family excited. I wasn't even teaching this publicly. I was just telling friends and family, but they were getting excited and they were referring their friends and family to me too. And I said, hey, if I just send you these people to basically do all the work for me, will you do it for a 50% cut? He said, yeah, I'll cut you half. Sure. I was like, really? That's awesome. So I can literally like spend a half hour with these people and make, basically half percent of my origination or 50% of my origination. And he's like, yeah, like great. And so I would just spend a little bit of time with people, tell them what they could do with a mortgage. They're like, cool. How do I do it? Talk to Clark. So I would just refer them on to Clark. So instead of being the do-it-yourselfer, which is what I was, like people got to go through me, and there's that scarcity that you have to have all those commissions or whatever going through you. And by the way, I was actually cutting back my origination fee to like a 0.5%. So the ironic thing is, I'm sending him to Clark. He's charging the full origination. I'm getting paid the same as I was getting paid before, but now I'm not doing any of the work. so, so I ended up doing that, and I was getting like 1,000, 2,000 bucks a month, just checks coming in the mail from having a referral. And I didn't just do that with him. I was like, who else could I refer people to like this? And I was like, there's a wholesale jeweler in Salt Lake City. I was referring people that were getting married because I was in my 20s, right? And I was like, don't buy your engagement ring in the mall. You'll pay 3 times as much as you will here. Go here, you'll buy it wholesale. And then they would send me a 5% kickback or whatever for like 40 or 50 bucks. Nothing huge. But between the real estate and that as well, I was making like 5,000 bucks or so a month. I was literally making the goal money I was trying to make. And I only needed 3,500 a month to live on back then. But the 5,000 was exactly what I was hoping to make in my 40s if I scrimped and saved enough. And now I was doing it sooner, working maybe a couple hours a week. And that was my big epiphany right there. That's how I did it.
How did that evolve into the work that you do with clients? Like maybe just
Mhm.
walk us through a couple examples of the clients that you've been able to help and what you've been able to identify as holes in their financial picture, if you will, and how you've helped them pivot into strategies that have helped them start increasing cash flow and achieve that financial independence.
So it's pretty easy. I mean, well, easy for me. I know it's not easy for everybody, but it's pretty simple. So, like for example, we had a guy that named Dan that came through. He worked. He was in the military for years, retired. He was 60 years old. He had $1 million saved up, and his financial advisor says, "Cool, now you can live on 30,000 a year." He's like, "I live in California. No one can live on 30,000 a year. You're like homeless at 30,000 a year." And so he started looking for answers. He found our podcast, he found our Money Ripples podcast, and then eventually reached out to us. And so, like in his case, we said, all right, let's see what you can do. And we're more strategists and connectors. We don't raise capital. We don't have our own investments or anything, but we do have, like over the years, I've built up people that I invest with or people that I would trust with investments. And so we have this whole community of people they can go to that have, more real estate. Most of them are real estate backed. It could be like oil and gas. There could be things like franchises or whatnot too. But in his case, when all was said and done, he's like, you know what? I like, some of these duplexes. I'm going to buy those, have a property manager for him. So I'm not the property manager. So he bought them across the country in another state because California is horrible for rentals. So we bought them out east, right? But he had a property manager taking care of them. He also got into like some oil and gas investments and getting paid off that. And then he did some things with like lending, lending his money out and whatnot. And when all was said and done, his million was now kicking off somewhere between 100 and 130,000 a year, which
Wow.
was way better than 30,000, right? So that was cool. And the one thing I'll say about him that was really impactful for me was that was 4 years ago. Just a few months ago, I got a text from his best friend who said, "Hey, I don't know if you know, but Dan just passed away. Just at his desk, sitting there, had a heart attack." He's like, "But I'll let you know that we talked about you, like you, Chris, all the time, and just how grateful he was that he had those years, those years he even had. He had like a cancer scare, but he overcame the cancer. but then just at his desk, just randomly, he had a heart attack. But he was able to volunteer for the wildlife service and do some things there, and just spending doing his time what he loved, and that's the thing I like. Is like you buy your time back. It's not just financial freedom, as you mentioned, like that pursuing freedom. It's time freedom that you get with that financial freedom. Another example was I had this couple that they're more like one was a business owner, the other was like a W-2 employee, and then they even worked as consultants in tech companies, made great money, but they were like, yeah, we feel good, but we've got like $5 million in like Meta and Google stocks. Maybe we should diversify away from that. And so we started looking at their situation, but before we even worried about investing, we looked at their cash flow first because we analyzed the cash flow as well as looking at their balance sheet to see what they've got. And the cash flow has said, wait a minute, we could refinance your house and actually like go and pay off some of these loans and just consolidate this. We'll free up $3,800 a month just doing that. So zero money out of pocket, we could free up $3,800 a month. So we had them do that. On top of that, we found out, hey, with you being business owners, I can guarantee you're already overpaying in taxes because that's what we find 100% of the time with business owners, right? So we got them to a CPA, found out we're going to save them somewhere between 30 and 40,000 a year is what they've been saving for the last couple of years from what they were paying using their previous accountant. So already, I mean, now that's pushing the number up towards like 75,000. But they also had an investment property that was zero cash flow net per month, but it had a couple 100,000 of equity. So we sold that property, got the equity out of that, invested it. So then again, no money out of pocket yet, and they're still about 100,000 richer in cash flow each and every month. And then we went to finally to the stocks. We're like, okay, now your goal is only like 300,000 a year. Okay, couple $1 million of this. You don't have to liquidate all your stocks. Couple $1 million making 10% will make you $200,000 a year. Bada boom, bada bing. Here you go. And so now they're work optional, right? And they still have the stocks, even though they were like, I hate stocks now, but I used to be a stock trader and options trader, and I'm like, ugh, I wouldn't want to be a part of stock market, but that's what they did. So it's kind of cool just to see again the whole picture, and everybody's a different situation. I just had a couple last week where we had him do investments, but he started losing sight. He started going more the traditional thinking with money, and he was like trying to pack money away, stuffing his IRAs and his 401ks, which is just locking your money in prison. That's a big no-no. I would definitely, my advice to people is always get lean, get liquid, and get out, right? Get lean means be a wise steward of your money. You don't have to be cheap. You don't have to live on rice and beans, but be a wise steward. Get liquid means you have liquid cash in your possession. Don't lock it up in equity in houses so you can't get to it, or lock it away in 401ks and IRAs where you have to wait till you're 60, or so to get to that money. Get it in your possession so then you can get it out to create passive income right now. And so he had started to do that, but then he started having that accumulation mentality taught by financial advisors. He started locking it away again. And his wife reached out. He's like, I am so pissed right now. Like, I'm working my job. I'm working my tail off. He's working his tail off as a dentist. This is ridiculous. Like, we got to get out of this rat race. Like, we're paycheck to paycheck now. And they make 400,000 a year. And so I started looking at everything they had. And again, I was like, well, look, you got all this crypto stuff. Why don't you sell some of this Bitcoin? Or you've got, these life insurance policies we set up for you that are super cash rich. They got this money available. Why don't we use some of this money to pay off some of these credit cards you've now built up because you've been keep putting your money in 401ks. Now you've charged up credit cards. Pay these off. We'll free up $2,800 a month. And then let's take an extra couple $100,000 of this other money, like from your Bitcoin. If we can get rid of that and then get into real estate investments that doing hard money lending or something like that, guess what? We can actually now increase your cash flow by a total of about $4,500 a month. And we're just getting warmed up, and it's funny. I did an episode recently on my podcast talking about that. The wife realized I was talking about her because I brought it up. And she's like, no, like what you said, I appreciate you keeping us anonymous, but yes, like that's been saving our marriage because I was so bitter against him because he's so scared that he just keeps locking his money away, but doesn't do anything to help us today. She's like, and I was supposed to quit my job years ago, and it won't let me because the cash flow is not there. So it's a very real thing, right? And I tell you, as a business owner, the best thing I've ever experienced is having financial freedom, because when I know I have enough passive income coming in that I don't have to make money in my business, that's when everybody wants to pay me in business. It's when you don't have that business breath, right? When you're not desperate for business, you're not repelling people. People are actually attracted to you more because they know you don't need the money and they know your intentions are pure. And I think that's powerful.
I agree completely with that statement for sure. Talk me through, who is your ideal client then? So far, you've shared a few people that one had 5 million in stocks, the other had 1 million in a savings account. Is
Mhm.
it always people that have already a ton of liquidity and they're just going to repurpose that liquid cash? Or is it also people that don't have a ton of liquidity, but perhaps they don't realize they have access, like you said, home equity, lazy home equity, things like this? I mean, I I definitely helped a lot of people in my mortgage career
Mhm.
understand that there's an opportunity cost to that home equity, and created strategies to lead to a path of financial freedom through different real estate investing strategies and other types of things. But, certainly consolidating debt and all that high interest rate credit. And yeah, so I mean, is there an ideal client, or can you help just about anybody, at least from a strategist perspective?
A definite ideal client. I mean, the ideal is if we can at least access a couple $100,000, whether it's like you said, trapped equity or money sitting in savings or whatever it is. Even money in IRAs or 401ks if you're not working for a company, right? If you're in a current company 401k, it's locked up. But if you change jobs, we could do something with that by moving it over and self-directing it and using it in real estate or something like that. But I'll give you three examples of people that had less money, right? Because generally at least a couple 100,000 is what we want. So like I had one guy that had $250,000, worked for Hollywood. And even despite 2020, where that shut down for several months and affected his income, despite 2023, where there was a writer's strike for half that year, we were able to get him to the point where now he's about $4,000 a month of passive income, right? From that quarter million. Where again, before 3% of a quarter million is like 7,500 a year, not that much, but that it not only just was quarter million that we invested, but now it's worth about almost 700,000 of equity in these properties that cash flow about 4,000 a month. I had another client that was in San Diego that he was a chiropractor. And funny enough, he had some savings, but he didn't have a lot. But he did have a property that he was just so married to because his goal was he was very he's I have a lot of Asian clients, and Asian clients are like the super savers, like the best savers I have of all my clients. And he's like, my goal is in 6 years, 100% debt free, mortgage paid off of my house, mortgage paid off of my rental property. His rental property was paying him a net $200 a month, but he had 700,000 of equity in that property. So I taught him about return on equity. I said, your return on equity on this property is 0.3%. You would be better off selling this house and putting in a CD, basically putting the equity in a CD. Well, he didn't do that, but it did take me 2 years to convince him to sell. He finally did, fortunately, still at the height of the real estate market. And then he went and he bought 6 properties out in New Orleans. Well, those 6 properties have kind of multiplied a little bit as he's taken the cash flow and reinvested. He's got, I think, now 8 or 9 properties, but they cash flow over 100,000 a year. So we went from 200 bucks a month to over 100,000 a year with really no money out of pocket, right? It was just using the money that was trapped in prison that we got out of prison to make it work for him. Another guy was a rancher out of Nevada. This rancher, I mean, I'd worked with him for 15 years. The biggest problem was, of course, as a rancher, that there's not a lot of banks that will lend on it. So he was asset rich, cash poor, right? And see a lot of our clients that are kind of that way. Is they're like, hey, I've got net worth. He's like, I'm worth millions, but I can barely pay my tax bill each year, right? And so I said, well, if there's a way we can get access to it. And so we finally found a bank where he could get access to that equity, got it out, did various different real estate investment deals and whatnot, and increased his cash flow by like 200,000 a year. So, which by the way, like for him, he only wanted 100,000 a year. So we actually went above and beyond what he needed, completely transforming him and his family's life, and actually transforming. He was a third generation rancher. It's the first time that they say, hey, we actually feel like we are abundant, where we saw our, father, grandfather. I mean, it was like they had lots of land, they had lots of cattle, but they just were like feast or famine. And that pattern has been broken now, going to the fourth and fifth generations of their kids.
So cool. So you mentioned earlier that several of your clients have had success becoming hard money lenders with
Mhm.
the liquid funds on hand.
Yeah.
Can you share how you help them get to that point? Because I hear people talk a lot about becoming a lender, and even just small amounts at a high interest rate can start to compound and add up. Do you help them get found as lenders? I mean, how do they find the people that need to borrow the money? And then I think there's also some regulations around it. So it's
Mhm.
complicated for a lot of our listeners. They might be thinking like, where would you even begin if you had money to lend? And how
Yeah.
do you go from there?
One thing you have to remember as a passive investor is that you're betting on the jockey just as much as you are the horse, right? It's more important about who you invest with than just what they're investing in. And that's something that we've kind of built when we built our community of people like investors, like investment operators that we work with. So when our clients are saying, when they're looking at the different options and we talk about hard money lending, we might refer to people that have been in the business for at least 15, 20 years that have been doing the same old stuff. They've probably done like literally like thousands of like real estate deals as they've done it. And they can do it one of two ways. Either one, they're going on directly on the property so that they're on title. They're literally the bank, right? Just like if you don't pay your mortgage payment, the bank's going to foreclose. You could do the same thing on these investors. These investors are often just trying to do a fix and flip or something like that. That's one of the only strategies that are kind of working right now in the current environment. And so for those, like, yeah, you being the lender, them not having to worry about going to a bank and trying to do all this stuff, using you as a lender, it's not hard to get double-digit returns on that money. But if they don't pay you, okay, well, you take the property. And usually if there's enough equity in the property, like I generally recommend people look for at least like no more than 65 to 70% loan to value, right? Or LTV, right? So we want to make sure there's significant equity before you try to lend. Really, you're trying to become like the bank and you're going to treat them much like a bank would. Like you want to make sure that they're going to be solvent and that's going to work. Another option in that same field is there's some that offer debt funds, right? Where they might have hundreds of these type of notes, that you could be lending on, but instead of you being on just one, they spread the risk among many. So where you're not just going all in on that one deal, like now you're just going. Now I'll tell you this: usually they'll just say, "Here's the rate we're going to pay you." It could be like 10%, 11%, 12%, something like that, but they'll just pay you a rate, and that's it. And then they keep whatever profits they make above and beyond that on their funds. So there's really different ways you can do it, but it really doesn't. The good news is, I mean, these people both directions. Whether you're doing the fund's obviously the most passive, but even if you're trying to be on an individual property, that often these companies are curating the deals already. They're already gone through. They're already like screened them to say what are like the best deals out there, like when they're looking to find these deals, and then they're just connecting you with them. So that's the good news. It's actually not as hard, yeah, as it needs to be. You just need to know how to ask the right questions and then just be willing to, take the leap of faith at some point.
And so your clients essentially get access to your network.
Mhm.
And so you can be able to make those connections and then the investments flow from there. And then in
Exactly.
what capacity can people work with you? Is it just one-on-one or do you have
Uh-huh.
a group format or I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, we do both within the community, but we do one-on-one because everybody's different, right? Nobody should be put into like a big conveyor belt box. Like everybody has a different financial situation, different goals, even different preferences. Like some people will look at one investment, say this is the best thing ever, and the others will say, "Nah, I don't like that." Right? So it's got to be customized to you. But no, we work as a part of a community as well. There's people that ask each other questions online and things like that. We also do monthly calls and whatnot. But ultimately, our whole goal is how do we make sure we get you to your passive income goal? How do we get you to the point where you are work optional, where you have enough passive income so you can work because you want to, not because you have to?
Love that. I love that. I mean, who is listening that doesn't want that? I don't know. I'm sitting here
I
like
know,
thinking, I'm so glad
like
I brought you
like
on the
what my shirt
show.
says, right? I love passive income. I mean, who doesn't, right?
I know it's the best. I mean,
Yeah,
we have some passive investments and it's like I almost forget about them because I don't have to do anything for them. And then the money just shows up in the bank and you're like, "Oh, that's so fun." So
yeah.
nice. Such a
It's
nice
a
little
dream. I
bonus.
mean, it's amazing, but it's scary because you do have to be careful. There's so many people that claim talking about quote unquote passive income, but
Yeah.
then it's not passive at all. Like, hey, here's a passive income. Start an Amazon store. Oh, but I have to start a whole new business and like take my attention off of what makes me the most money right now in my own business, right? Or they'll tell you passive income, but then it's like, oh, you learn to be a wholesaler. But like, well, that's a whole business again of itself. This is like really how do I become a hands-off investor? And it's having the capital, having the cash, and knowing who are the right people to do it to. And I'll tell you, important thing too is if you're doing that, there are a lot of people that have mastermind groups surrounding this kind of concept, or they might say, here's our network of people. Be aware because usually those mastermind groups, not only do they charge you to be part of a mastermind group, but they also get paid on the back end by these investors. So they're not referring you to those people because they're the best or because they're trustworthy. They're referring you to them because they're willing to pay them. And
Mm.
that's something that I made as a hard rule. Like I don't do that. Like I don't ever want to be paid. I never want people to think there's an ulterior motive to why they get referred to somebody, right? In fact, I just had a guy that does hard money lending saying, yeah, I'll pay your clients between 10.5 and 11.5% between, depending on how much they invest with me. And I'll pay you 1% origination on the back too. So every time they invest, you get paid 1%, Chris. I said, that's great. No, I said, I have a hard rule against that. But I'm like, but can you pay that 1% back to my investors? He said, well, yeah, I could, but nobody's ever asked me to do that before. I'm like, well, yeah, but if you did that, wouldn't that make your returns better for them? It's like, yeah, actually, the returns would be amazing for them. I'm like, good, do that. And so now he's like, okay, cool. I'll do that just for you. Everybody else wants the money. I'm like, I get it, but my clients pay me so that they want us to give them that unbiased. Okay, I'm biased. Let's admit it. I am biased, but more of a I'm not being swayed by money, right? Like that I work for them, not the other way around.
Yes, 100%. I love that. Integrity is a magnet for abundance. That's how I
Mhm.
feel. So I love
Absolutely.
that. All right. So I want to respect your time, and we've covered a lot here, and I'm sure that people listening would love to keep listening, but at the same time, it comes back to everyone's personal financial situation is unique. So if
Mhm.
anyone listening does want to connect with you or even refer you to clients, because I just want to point out for anyone listening, if you are a real estate professional, if you're a real estate agent or a mortgage lender, one of the things that we're really passionate about at Pursuing Freedom isn't just teaching you how to build a business that results in more transactions and more paychecks in your bank account. It's about having an impact, and the impact is what ripples out and starts to attract you the abundance that far exceeds anything that you could ever really imagine. And so, one of the reasons I love this podcast is not just to give the listener a resource that can impact themselves, but also to give you a resource that can be a conversation starter with your clients. So if you are serving clients, home buyers, sellers, investors, I want you to think about if there was something you learned here from Chris that you can bring up in a conversation. Because let me tell you something, and I'm sorry to bring this full circle, Chris, but I want to drill this home for the listeners that right now the real estate market is challenging. And if a client is shopping around and they approach a real estate agent, for example, and they just, ask them about their process for listing their house, and the real estate agent does nothing more than outline the process for the listing and the sale process and all the things. So they stay very transactional. And then the same consumer goes and talks to another real estate agent. And that real estate agent starts having conversations like looking at this home equity, thinking about the opportunity cost, wondering if there's not a better path for them, talking
Mhm.
about all the people they have in their back pocket that could be a resource to them, that could give them some advice to make sure that this is the right financial decision. Which real estate agent would that consumer choose? Because instantly in that first conversation, they're wowed. Same thing for the mortgage lender. What's your interest rate? The interest rate is this. Okay, go to lender number two. What's your interest rate? Well, there's a lot that goes into that. And let's talk about the big picture financial plan. And let's talk about all the resources I have. And I can connect you with people that can make sure you're making the best financial decision, et cetera, et cetera. Like that is the way we want to brand ourselves in the real estate space. And I really want to point that out because this is more than me introducing you to Chris as someone that you could connect with and know. This is about me introducing you to someone that could be in your Rolodex, that can change the conversation, that can level up your reputation, your impact. And that is what we're really about here. So I just want to point that out that there's more to this. And I really want people to connect with you, Chris, and to know you. And I want them to have you in their back pocket to be a better service provider in their marketplace because this is so, so important. And it's really, really, really necessary in this particular market because our value is what attracts our opportunities and it's not the job title. It goes far beyond that. So I really want everyone listening to leave with that and let your mind wander a little bit about how you can take this conversation into every conversation you're having with your future contacts and clients. So sorry for the digression there, but when I bring people on that are not necessarily real estate agents and lenders, and we're talking about something totally different, there's a reason behind it that goes beyond just the listener knowing you. It's so much more than that. It's like your podcast is called Money Ripples. This is the ripple effect that we're trying to create in the world. So thank you again, Chris. So how can folks find you, follow you, get a hold of you? What are the best ways?
Yeah, I mean, the Money Ripples podcast is a great place to start, great information on that. Also, moneyripples.com, moneyripples.com, like everything's at Money Ripples, the social media, moneyripples.com. We even have a passive income calculator you can play with on there as well. That's pretty cool too. So lots of fun stuff.
Well, I think it's all wonderful and brilliant, and I'm so glad to know you because I can't wait to introduce you to more people that need to know you and what you're doing out there in the world because this is a really interesting time in our world and people need resources like you to be helping them think differently and to see opportunities where maybe it feels a little dark and the light is right there on the other side if they can just get the support of somebody who can crack it wide open for them. So, thank you so much for all you're doing.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Aaron.
And to all my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I beg you every episode, if you haven't stopped what you're doing and left a review for this podcast, I'm asking you because it helps us continue to attract amazing guests like Chris. And it also helps this content get found so more people can be on their journey to building a life you don't need a vacation from. I love you. I appreciate you. We'll see you next time.